Welcome to Torah Tuesday, Exodus 21 and 20 and 21. The Ten Commandments. This is our first taste of the law from God. And we're going to pace ourselves here. I'm sure there were lots of things in the readings today that made you raise an eyebrow. Buying and selling slaves, the difference between how to treat a male slave and a female slave, how murder should be punished by putting the murderer to death. Unless it's a slave, then it need only be punished. And if the slave recovers from a beating, the beater doesn't even need to be punished. These things, they grab our attention and they make us question things from a modern standard point. We'll come back to these things later. We're pacing ourselves. Remember, we're at week 2 of the law. We have plenty more to go after this, right up till the end of Deuteronomy. And these things are going to come up again and again. So today what we're going to do, because in Exodus chapter 20, we have the 10 Commandments. So we're going to spend our time talking about them. Now remember that this is central to everything that we have seen so far in Genesis and Exodus. Genesis chapter 1, God speaks 10 times in the creation narrative. And then in Exodus, there are 10 plagues. And now we have the 10 Commandments, or as they're sometimes called, the 10 words. The narrative so far, it's been preparing us for this moment. God has entered into a relationship with his people, and now he's going to give them the terms of the relationship. This is a big deal. We're not going to go for a deep dive into these commandments. There's plenty of resources out there that flesh them out. What I want to do is I want to show you that these commandments are logical conclusions in light of the story so far. So keeping in mind Genesis and Exodus and what we've seen so far, these commandments are very logical conclusions. So let's have a look at the 10 commandments in light of the story so far. Firstly, the commandments start by saying, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Now, it's really important to realize that the first thing in the 10 Commandments is not a commandment. The 10 Commandments separated from this preamble is a grave error that is often made, if we're being honest. I remember when I was a kid walking into a church that had the 10 Commandments on the wall, which is many churches do, but they didn't have the preamble. There was nothing that said, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. It just had these 10 words, which I guess were seen as a list of behaviors. And that is wrong. You have to have the preamble. You have to know that these commandments come in light of what God has already done for his people. The story so far is that God has already set his concern and his love on these people. He has already literally moved heaven and earth to have them as his people and to meet them at this mountain. And these laws are now they're not just a way to behave. It's not just a to-do list for me. It's a response to the love that's already shown. That's really, really, really important to realize. God has already acted. And so the 10 Commandments come in light of the fact that he has the Lord their God who has brought them out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And actually the 10 Commandments themselves all recall the story so far. So the first commandment is that there should be no gods beside me, but literally it says there should be no gods before me. He is the creator God in Genesis chapter 1, and there is literally nothing else before him. So this commandment says there should be nothing else before him. There should be no worship of any other gods before Yahweh, the God who made everything. Number 2, no images should be made in the form of anything on heaven above or on earth below or the waters beneath. This again reminds us of the story of creation. God is the creator of all the world. And so we can't use the world, the things in heaven or on earth or in the waters below, to make an image of him. He is the creator. These things are creation. And actually, in the creation story, God has already made an image for himself. It's humans. And so that's the image of him in creation. Nothing else should be. Number 3, do not misuse or misrepresent is probably a sharper translation. the name of Yahweh. So God, in the Exodus story, he spent the last 20 chapters making it clear what he wants his name to be associated with. He wants it to be associated with redemption, with mighty acts of power, with the forgiving of sin, with the covering over of the guilty party, and also with punishing evil. And so now, Israel, do not misuse or misrepresent the name of Yahweh in the way that you live out your life. That's what God wants. And then he says, number 4, remember the Sabbath. Keep in mind that these people were slaves. And in Egypt, they didn't hear the words of God through Moses because of their hard labor, back in chapter 5. So now, God asks that they would rest on the 7th day of each week, just as he rested on the 7th day of creation. They were slaves, but not any longer. Number 5, honor your mother and father. Now, if you remember back to the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, that story would have gone so much better if children were honoring their parents. That story, it reminds us of the importance of honoring your mother and father. Number 6, do not murder. God made humanity in his image, each of us, every person in his image. And the first act of disobedience that's recorded outside the garden is murder. When Cain kills Abel, he steals the image away. Treating others as if they did not bear the image of God can end up in murder. And so we should not murder. Do not commit adultery. Abraham had many wives. Jacob had at least 2 wives. Judah slept with his father's wife. See, the narrator of Genesis, he never comments on whether this is good or bad. But back in Genesis chapter 2, we are told that a man should leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. And the 2 should become one flesh. It doesn't say that the 3 or the 4 or the 5 should become one flesh. It says the 2. And so there is this, in the story so far, there is already this intrinsic idea that adultery is wrong. And so the law says, do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Number 8, Jacob stole Esau's blessing. Leah stole Rachel's husband, so to speak, I guess. Laban stole 14 years of Jacob's life. The brothers steal Joseph's coat. These are all cautionary tales. These are here to remind us that we should not steal. Number 9, do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Now, neighbors in Israel were other Israelites. Remember, these people are living in the wilderness together. So bearing false witness about your neighbor was bearing false witness about your family. And that comes up in Genesis a lot as well. Remember that one of the reasons Joseph's brothers hated him was because he gave a bad report about them to his father. Did they do something wrong? We aren't told. So Joseph likely bore a false testimony about them to his father. And then number 10 says, do not covet your neighbor's house, neither his wife, his servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything. What's interesting about this one is that the word covet in this commandment is the same word that's used to talk about the desire that Eve had for the fruit in the garden. And so as you can see, these commandments are just brimming with things from the story so far. You need to understand the commandments in light of the story. These commandments are logical conclusions about how we should behave based on what we have seen in this story so far. Based on what the story has told us about the nature of God, Creator, all-powerful, the one before all things, and the nature of humanity, fickle, stealing, lying, murdering, adulterous. These commandments will help you to live a better life in tune with the realities of the world, God and humanity. So rather than these commandments being the work that we need to do because so that God would love us, these commandments are the things that we do in response to what God has already done for us. And these laws are actually for our good. They help us to live in tune with the reality of our world, to live in harmony with the reality of what we've seen so far. Hopefully that's helpful. Enjoy your day.